The streets of New York City buzzed with their usual chaos, a symphony of blaring horns, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens. Amid the towering skyscrapers and glittering shop windows stood Father Peter, leaning against the cold brick wall of an abandoned storefront. His tattered coat barely shielded him from the biting wind, and the cardboard sign in his hands read, "Lost everything. Anything helps. God bless." Father Peter hadn't always been invisible. Once, he was the beloved leader of St. Vincent's Parish in Queens, known for his impassioned sermons and tireless community service. But 5 years ago, tragedy struck when a fire engulfed his church, destroying everything. Insurance barely covered the cleanup, and mounting debts forced Father Peter to sell the land. Overcome by guilt, grief, and an unbearable sense of failure, he spiraled into despair. The parish disbanded, his purpose vanished, and he found himself homeless, surviving on prayers and occasional acts of kindness. This day seemed like any other, until Father Peter noticed a commotion across the street. A crowd had gathered outside Trump Tower, their attention fixed on the golden doors where cameras flashed incessantly. Moments later, Donald Trump emerged, flanked by his security and aides. His confident stride and larger-than-life presence drew attention like a magnet. Father Peter's first instinct was resentment. He had seen Trump on TV, the billionaire whose name adorned skyscrapers, hotels, and even planes. How could one man have so much while people like him had nothing? But then a daring thought crossed his mind. What if I just ask? Summoning his courage, Father Peter stepped forward. His hands trembled as he clutched his sign, but his voice remained steady. "Mr. Trump," he called out, "can you give me $1?" The crowd fell silent. The question seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the noise of the city. Trump stopped mid-stride and turned toward the voice, his sharp eyes locking onto Father Peter. His expression was unreadable, neither dismissive nor amused, but curious. $1? Trump repeated, his voice carrying an almost amused undertone. "Yes." Father Peter nodded. "Just $1." For a moment, Trump studied the man before him. There was something about Father Peter, his sincerity, his calmness despite his obvious struggle, that caught Trump's attention. After a long pause, Trump smiled faintly. "I won't give you $1, Trump said, his tone firm but measured. "But I'll give you something better." Before Father Peter could respond, Trump gestured toward his team. "Meet me here tomorrow at noon," he said. "I'll have something for you." And with that, Trump disappeared into his car, leaving Father Peter stunned. The crowd murmured in curiosity, but Father Peter stood motionless, clutching his sign. That night, as he lay under the familiar bridge he called home, a flicker of hope stirred within him. What could Trump possibly mean by something better? The streets of New York City buzzed with their usual chaos, a symphony of blaring horns, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens. Amid the towering skyscrapers and glittering shop windows stood Father Peter, leaning against the cold brick wall of an abandoned storefront. His tattered coat barely shielded him from the biting wind, and the cardboard sign in his hands read, "Lost everything. Anything helps. God bless." Father Peter hadn't always been invisible. Once, he was the beloved leader of St. Vincent's Parish in Queens, known for his impassioned sermons and tireless community service. But 5 years ago, tragedy struck when a fire engulfed his church, destroying everything. Insurance barely covered the cleanup, and mounting debts forced Father Peter to sell the land. Overcome by guilt, grief, and an unbearable sense of failure, he spiraled into despair. The parish disbanded, his purpose vanished, and he found himself homeless, surviving on prayers and occasional acts of kindness. This day seemed like any other, until Father Peter noticed a commotion across the street. A crowd had gathered outside Trump Tower, their attention fixed on the golden doors where cameras flashed incessantly. Moments later, Donald Trump emerged, flanked by his security and aides. His confident stride and larger-than-life presence drew attention like a magnet. Father Peter's first instinct was resentment. He had seen Trump on TV, the billionaire whose name adorned skyscrapers, hotels, and even planes. How could one man have so much while people like him had nothing? But then a daring thought crossed his mind. What if I just ask? Summoning his courage, Father Peter stepped forward. His hands trembled as he clutched his sign, but his voice remained steady. "Mr. Trump," he called out, "can you give me $1?" The crowd fell silent. The question seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the noise of the city. Trump stopped mid-stride and turned toward the voice, his sharp eyes locking onto Father Peter. His expression was unreadable, neither dismissive nor amused, but curious. $1? Trump repeated, his voice carrying an almost amused undertone. "Yes." Father Peter nodded. "Just $1." For a moment, Trump studied the man before him. There was something about Father Peter, his sincerity, his calmness despite his obvious struggle, that caught Trump's attention. After a long pause, Trump smiled faintly. "I won't give you $1, Trump said, his tone firm but measured. "But I'll give you something better." Before Father Peter could respond, Trump gestured toward his team. "Meet me here tomorrow at noon," he said. "I'll have something for you." And with that, Trump disappeared into his car, leaving Father Peter stunned. The crowd murmured in curiosity, but Father Peter stood motionless, clutching his sign. That night, as he lay under the familiar bridge he called home, a flicker of hope stirred within him. What could Trump possibly mean by something better? The morning after the dinner, Father Peter found himself once again standing in the shadow of Trump Tower. The memory of the previous night filled him with a mixture of pride and nervous energy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Donald Trump's next challenge would push him even further. The air was cold, but his determination was steady as he waited on the bustling sidewalk. When Trump appeared, stepping confidently out of the golden doors, his presence cut through the city's noise like a beacon. Trump's expression was calm but commanding as he approached. "Father Peter," he said, his tone deliberate, "you impressed me yesterday. You proved that you could inspire people, even in the face of doubt. That's a rare quality. But now, I want you to take that energy and apply it to something bigger." Father Peter stood straighter, though his heart raced. "I'm ready," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. Without another word, Trump gestured for Peter to follow him to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the engine. Peter's mind buzzed with questions. What could possibly come next? After a short drive, the car came to a halt in the Bronx, in front of a neglected corner of the neighborhood. Peter stepped out and surveyed the scene. It was worse than he had imagined. The abandoned lot was a wasteland of overgrown weeds, shattered glass, and rusting debris. The surrounding buildings were crumbling, their walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The faint stench of rotting trash hung in the air, a stark reminder of years of neglect. Trump's voice broke the silence. "This is your next challenge," he said, gesturing toward the lot. "Turn this wasteland into something meaningful. Clean it up. Build a space where the community can come together. A place where hope can grow." He turned to face Peter, his gaze unwavering. "I'll provide tools, but everything else, resources, volunteers, and vision, that's up to you." Peter stared at the lot, doubt creeping into his mind. The task felt overwhelming, and a voice inside him whispered that it might be too much. But then he remembered the dinner, the faces of the people he had fed, and the spark of hope he had seen in their eyes. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and nodded. "I'll do it." Trump gave a rare smile of approval. "Good. I'll check in soon." With that, he returned to his car and disappeared into the traffic, leaving Peter alone with the daunting task before him. Peter started by walking through the neighborhood. It was a place that had clearly been forgotten, boarded-up windows, broken sidewalks, and a weariness etched into the faces of the people he passed. Undeterred, Peter began knocking on doors, introducing himself to residents, and explaining his vision of turning the abandoned lot into a park. "It's going to be a place for kids to play, for families to gather," he told them. "It can be a fresh start, not just for the lot, but for the whole neighborhood." The responses were far from enthusiastic. "Why bother?" scoffed an older man sitting on his stoop. "This place has been a dump for years. Ain't nobody gonna care." A middle-aged woman shook her head with a bitter laugh. "It's just another pipe dream. People come around here with big promises all the time, and nothing ever changes." Peter felt the sting of rejection, but he didn't let it stop him. He kept knocking, sharing his story with anyone who would listen. He spoke about the fire that had destroyed his church, the years he had spent lost, and the opportunity Trump had given him to create something new. Little by little, he began to win people over. A mother of 3 hesitated at first, but eventually said, "If it's for the kids, I'll help. Lord knows they need a place to play other than the street." A group of teenagers, initially dismissive, changed their tune when Peter promised to turn one corner of the lot into a basketball court. One of Peter's most surprising breakthroughs came from Mr. Alvarez, the gruff owner of a nearby hardware store. "Look, Father," Alvarez said, crossing his arms. "I've seen people try to fix that lot before, and it always ends in failure. But," he sighed and shook his head, "I'll give you some tools, shovels, gloves, garbage bags. Just don't make me regret it." The following Saturday, Peter arrived at the lot, not knowing what to expect. He had spent the week recruiting volunteers and spreading the word, but he was still unsure how many would actually show up. To his surprise, a small but determined crowd had gathered: families, teenagers, and even a few skeptics who had decided to give him a chance. Armed with Alvarez's donated tools and an optimistic spirit, the group got to work. The cleanup was grueling. Volunteers pulled stubborn weeds, hauled away piles of garbage, and scrubbed graffiti from the walls. The midday sun beat down on them, and by the afternoon, exhaustion began to set in. Some muttered about giving up, their enthusiasm waning. Peter, however, refused to let their spirits falter. "Every piece of trash we remove, every weed we pull, brings us one step closer to something beautiful," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Don't lose sight of what we're building here." His words seemed to work. The volunteers picked up their pace, and slowly, more people began to join. A local bakery donated pastries for the workers, and Mr. Alvarez surprised everyone by showing up with more supplies, muttering, "Figured you'd need extra." The most unexpected moment came when a group of homeless men, many of whom had attended Peter's dinner, arrived with shovels and determined expressions. "You gave us hope, Father," one of them said. "Now let us return the favor." Over the next 2 weeks, the lot began to transform. Volunteers planted flowers and trees donated by a local nursery, their vibrant colors breathing life into the once barren space. A muralist offered to paint the walls, replacing graffiti with stunning images of unity and growth. One wall featured children playing under a blue sky. Another depicted hands reaching out to one another in a gesture of support. A carpenter from a nearby church built a simple wooden playset, funded by donations collected from the congregation. A local handyman worked with the teenagers to construct the promised basketball court. turning a cracked patch of concrete into a space filled with possibility. Father Peter worked tirelessly alongside the volunteers, often staying late into the night to plan the next steps. There were setbacks. Heavy rain flooded part of the lot one night, undoing hours of progress. At another point, they ran out of paint for the murals. But each time, the community rallied to overcome the challenges. By the end of the second week, the lot was unrecognizable. What had once been a dumping ground was now a vibrant park. Children laughed as they climbed on the playset. Neighbors sat on freshly painted benches, and the air was filled with the sound of life, a stark contrast to the silence that had once defined the space. On the day of the park's grand opening, the neighborhood gathered to celebrate. Families brought picnic blankets. Children raced around the new basketball court, and volunteers beamed with pride at what they had accomplished. Peter stood at the park's entrance, shaking hands and thanking everyone who had made it possible. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Peter stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "This park is proof," he began, "that when we come together, no challenge is too great. It's not just a place for children to play or neighbors to gather. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we refuse to give up on each other." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers ringing out through the transformed space. For the first time in years, Peter felt a deep sense of fulfillment. That evening, as the celebration continued, a sleek black car pulled up to the edge of the park. Donald Trump stepped out, surveying the transformed lot with an approving nod. He walked slowly through the space, taking in the murals, the playset, and the laughter that filled the air. When he reached Peter, Trump extended his hand. "You've done it again, Father," he said firmly. "This isn't just a park, it's a statement. You've shown this community that change is possible." Peter smiled humbly. "It wasn't just me," he said. "The people here made it happen." Trump's expression grew serious. "You've proven you can inspire and rebuild. But now, I have one final challenge for you. This time, it's about creating something that will last for generations." Peter's heart raced as he met Trump's gaze. He didn't know what the final challenge would be, but he knew one thing for sure: he was ready. The morning after the park's grand opening, Father Peter arrived at Trump Tower for what he suspected would be his most difficult challenge yet. Donald Trump greeted him with his characteristic mix of authority and confidence. In his hand, Trump held an envelope, which he handed to Father Peter. Inside was an address, an empty plot of land in a struggling part of Queens. Trump's voice softened as he explained, "This is your final challenge. Father, I want you to build a church, not just a building for worship, but a sanctuary for the homeless, a community hub, and a place of hope. It's time to create something that will outlast us all." Father Peter's breath caught in his throat. Building a church was more than a challenge. It was a calling that resonated deeply with his faith. But the task seemed insurmountable. He had no resources, no congregation, and no starting point other than the barren plot of land. "Why a church?" Father Peter asked quietly. Trump looked at him with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Because faith is one of the most powerful forces on earth. A church isn't just bricks and mortar. It's a symbol of hope. It's where people find purpose, community, and belief. If anyone can make this happen, it's you." Father Peter nodded slowly. "I'll do it." When Father Peter arrived at the address, the sight was disheartening. The lot was overgrown with weeds, surrounded by crumbling buildings, and littered with trash. It felt lifeless, as though the neighborhood itself had given up on it. Father Peter knelt on the ground and whispered a prayer. "Lord, if this is your will, guide me. I can't do this alone." His first step was to engage the community. He visited nearby homes, introducing himself and sharing his vision. He explained that the church wouldn't just be for worship, but would serve as a shelter for the homeless, a resource center for job seekers, and a place where families could gather for community events. The responses were lukewarm at best. "A church? Here?" one man asked skeptically. "Who's going to come?" "We've heard promises like this before," a woman said. "Nothing ever changes." Father Peter didn't let the doubts shake him. He knocked on more doors, approached local businesses, and reached out to the homeless community. Slowly, a few people began to listen. One of the first to step forward was Rosa, the owner of a small grocery store. "If you're serious about this, Father," she said, "I'll donate what I can. Maybe some food for volunteers or supplies for events." Encouraged by Rosa's support, Father Peter continued his efforts. He reached out to other churches, former parishioners, and even contacted local construction companies. He shared his story of losing everything and finding a second chance through faith, and his authenticity began to resonate. The turning point came when a retired architect named Mr. Daniels heard about Father Peter's mission. "I can't build it for you," Mr. Daniels said, "but I can design it. Let's make something beautiful." Mr. Daniels' sketches were simple yet inspiring. A modest church with a bell tower, a large open hall for community events, and a small kitchen for serving meals. With a design in hand, Father Peter approached local construction companies, asking for discounts or donations. One company agreed to donate leftover materials, while another offered labor at a reduced cost. The next challenge was fundraising. Father Peter organized a community meeting at the new park he had helped create. Dozens of people showed up, curious about his vision. Standing in front of the crowd, Father Peter spoke with conviction. "This church isn't just for prayer," he said. "It's for all of us. It's a place where the homeless can find shelter, where children can learn, and where we can come together as a community. But I can't do this alone. I need your help." By the end of the meeting, donations began to trickle in. Some offered money, others volunteered their time, and a local hardware store pledged tools and paint. With the land cleared and resources slowly coming together, construction finally began. It was slow and grueling work. Volunteers from all walks of life pitched in: parents, teenagers, the homeless, and even skeptics who had once doubted Father Peter's vision. There were setbacks. A storm destroyed part of the foundation, delaying progress by weeks. At one point, they ran out of funding, forcing Father Peter to organize a last-minute fundraiser at the park. Despite the challenges, the community's determination never wavered. Father Peter's leadership and unwavering faith inspired them to keep going. One of the most touching moments came when a group of homeless men showed up unannounced, carrying tools. "You believed in us when no one else did," one of them said. "Now it's our turn to believe in you." Months later, the church was finally complete. Its bell tower stood tall against the skyline, its stained glass windows casting vibrant colors across the modest sanctuary. The interior was simple but warm, with rows of wooden pews, a humble altar, and a kitchen ready to serve those in need. On the day of the dedication, hundreds of people gathered to celebrate. Father Peter stood at the entrance, greeting everyone with a smile. Among the crowd were families, volunteers, former skeptics, and even some of the homeless men and women who had helped bring the church to life. As the church bells rang for the first time, Father Peter stepped to the pulpit. His voice, steady and filled with emotion, echoed through the sanctuary. "This church is not mine," he said. "It belongs to all of us. It is more than a building. It is a beacon of hope. It is proof that when we come together in faith and love, we can achieve the impossible." The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Donald Trump arrived later that afternoon, quietly observing the church and the bustling activity around it. He approached Father Peter, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "You've done it, Father," Trump said. "This isn't just a church. It's a legacy. You've created something that will stand for generations." Trump handed Father Peter a plaque. Inscribed on it were the words, "Faith builds futures. Hang this in the church." Trump said, "Let it remind everyone of what's possible when we dare to believe." Months later, the church had become the heart of the community. It offered daily meals, shelter for the homeless, and job training programs. Children played in the nearby park, while families attended workshops and events in the church hall. The bell tower rang every morning, its sound carrying a message of renewal and hope. Father Peter often reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the ashes of his old parish to the transformation of an entire neighborhood. He knew the work was far from over, but he also knew he was exactly where he needed to be. As he knelt in prayer one evening, the faint glow of candlelight illuminating the sanctuary, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for guiding me, for showing me that even in my darkest moments, you were leading me towards something greater." And as the bells rang out over the neighborhood, their sound carrying on the breeze, Father Peter knew his mission: to serve, to inspire, and to love would continue to transform lives for years to come. As the crowd in the park began to disperse, Father Peter lingered near the entrance, his heart full as he watched children play and neighbors share laughter. The park was alive, not just with activity, but with the sense of possibility. What had once been a forgotten wasteland was now a vibrant hub of connection, a testament to what faith, determination, and community could achieve. Donald Trump turned to Peter as they both stood silently, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink. "You've done something remarkable here, Father," Trump said. "This isn't just a park. It's a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, light can shine when someone dares to believe in it." Father Peter nodded, his voice soft but steady. This wasn't just about cleaning up a lot or planting flowers. It was about reminding people of their worth, about showing them that when we come together, we can create beauty in even the most broken places. Trump handed Peter a small card before leaving. On it were the words, "True leadership isn't about wealth or power. It's about the lives you touch and the hope you inspire." Below, in Trump's signature bold handwriting, was a simple phrase, "Keep building." As Peter slipped the card into his pocket, he turned back to the park and whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for guiding me, for giving me the strength to believe when I doubted myself. Let this be the beginning of something greater, not just for me, but for everyone who has been a part of this journey." This story is more than just a tale of transformation. It's a call to action. No matter where you are in life, no matter how daunting the challenges you face may seem, remember this: hope is never out of reach. Change begins with a single step, a single act of kindness, a single decision to believe that something better is possible. Just like Father Peter, we all have the power to rebuild, inspire, and leave the world better than we found it. You don't need great wealth or influence to make a difference, just a heart willing to serve and hands willing to work. May this story remind you of the boundless strength within you. May you find the courage to face your own challenges and the grace to inspire others along the way. And may you always remember that even in the darkest moments, there is light waiting to break through. Go forward with faith, kindness, and hope. Your story is still being written, and the best chapters are yet to come. Thank you for reading, and may your journey be filled with blessings.